And we're live. Hello once again, and thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of the Curious Leaders Path. Today's topic is leveraging the power in difference. You'll notice that from the panel today that Joanne isn't with us, so I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm Todd, you know me. Beside me is Kat. And we know her. And beside Kat is Lali Mohammed. He is a fundraiser and a member of the leadership team at the world's largest HIV hospital. And we're very, very lucky to have you with us today, Lali. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It really is. So I'd like to kick us off. Our topic today is leveraging. Here, I'm going to bring the banner up. I forgot to do that. Leveraging the power in difference. I know, right? And I think let's start by just talking about what do we mean by difference. Who wants to start?
Lali, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think at a foundational level, when I think about difference, I think about things that are not the same, right? People, things, places, ideas, and what a lovely word, right? What would our lives be if everything was the same? And so I'm really sort of kind of in love with the word difference because I think it allows us and gives us an opportunity to think about things that are not the same. Because I don't want to use the word difference when describing. Difference is nice because it's different, but things that are not the same, I think it's kind of a cool idea.
There's nothing wrong with a good circular argument now and then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I was doing research, the definition of diversity, I came across it in two completely different fields of research. And what I love about their definition of diversity, not difference, but I think it is really what difference is. When we're talking about people, it's about bringing different experiences, bringing different perspectives, bringing different ways of seeing the world as a guest perspective. So it really is thinking differently, acting differently, being differently. Yeah. So, and I just love that definition because it doesn't specify why. Yeah. It just specifies that we're coming at things with different tools, different strengths, those types of things. Todd, did you have anything you want to add? Or?
Well, for me, it's lived experience. I'm an expert on all of the things that have happened to me in my life, and that's it. and there's so many more lives. There's the saying that I used to use that's coming to me now, and it's that everyone has at least one story that I want to hear. And for the most part, what I've discovered is that the more I get to know people, there's actually many, many more than one story that I'd like to hear. I think that's it. Like, I think there's a joyousness in knowing someone more completely, and that's what comes up to me when I think when I think of difference. And that might be a good segue into the next question that I have, because what I want to know from a leadership perspective, why is it important? And before I do that, I want to say hey to Christine, because Christine's with us. I can see that in the comments. Thanks, and hey, Christine. So what's important about it? What do we think?
I mean, I'd love to pick up from where you ended, right? Like, What does this knowing somebody offer us? What does it allow us to imagine, to explore, to think through? What kinds of gifts does it offer us about our own lives, right? So often when I learn something new about somebody, it teaches me something about myself. And that kind of gift, I think, particularly when thinking about leaders, I think is invaluable. I love the title of this conversation today, The Curious Leaders Path, because I think curiosity does what so much of what I call to be, the big WS, white supremacy has sort of like ripped away from so many of us, which is a lack of imagination. Because when we can't imagine, right, we can't see through the thickness of the isms that have sort of shaped and limited our lives in so many
Right.
like violent ways. And so for me,
Yes.
curiosity offers us a gift to see through the haze and and want more for ourselves, our organizations, our communities,
Right.
and for you, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not just about me often, right? It's also about
Of course.
being in community with one another.
Right.
So for me, that's why it's valuable.
Right.
I'd like to add to that because it's not just the predominant, and I'm going to steer away from the word white supremacy just because for me it's too politically charged a word, but at the same time I don't want to deny it either.
Mm.
And the reason I have a bit of a hard time with it is because I've lived on 6 continents, 6 countries, 3 continents, and traveled, worked in a range of cultures. And every place I've lived has its own biases, its own isms. Yeah. And there's some places where I've lived where the expectations of what was the right thing to do was unbelievably strong. So it's not just a racial issue, although thank God that's coming to the fore in North America. And I don't want to diminish that at all. But we have to recognize this is a human nature thing to shun diversity and to promote conformity, especially when we have power structures at play. So I just want to make sure that number one, when we're talking about, and Lali, this is not to push back on you, it's to say, yeah. We have to recognize that it's sort of human nature to be scared a lot of times of diversity, differences. And there's a skill set that I think, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to where I think we want to go, but I think a lot of people have been very scared to really embrace differences. But what difference is, if we use the word diversity and we look at ecological studies, the less diversity we have, my mom used to tell me 100 years ago, she started her life as a gardener professionally. And she said, when she was a kid and when she was studying gardening, they had something like 20 different types of tomatoes. And then in Canada, you could get maybe 3 types of tomatoes, but that lack of diversity that we have makes our ecological system very weak. Yeah, so if we don't have this newness coming in and the challenges and the healthy competition that happens when we have differences, and I'm saying healthy, which does not mean no conflict, it means healthy conflict, right? So I think that the strength of diversity and difference is it makes us so much more resilient. And it also kind of makes life a lot more fun, because when I had these opportunities to live in all these different cultures as a child and as an adult, it just was really fun because, on a superficial level, it's like there's so many different foods that I didn't know about until I lived somewhere else. There were so many different dances and music, and it doesn't matter if I like them or not. It was just like, wow, who knew the world was so interesting, right? And if we think about the meaningful thing, well, obviously culture and food are meaningful, but if we then look at those much deeper issues that we often put an ism at the end, we really, by having too much conformity, we end up really losing so much, so much in terms of creativity and joy. And yeah. Todd, anything you would add?
Well, first I want to acknowledge Connie and Manal. Hi, I see your comments. Thank you. and I'm so glad to have you with us. And yeah, what's coming to me when I hear this is 2 things, because I think like the topic that we're talking about really is why are we challenged with difference, right, from a leadership perspective. And I think Lali, I know that you hit on it, and Kat, I know that you you didn't sidestep it, but it's and I think that what was important though was what you did say was structures of power, and certainly I'm going to go back to WS. White supremacy is certainly it is a structure of power, right? It's a structure of power, like whether we call it white supremacy or whether we call it colonialism. Both of them are in force in North America. We know those things, and there's lots and lots of structures in place that exist even today that were built on those things. And if I were to take your example of biodiversity within within an ecosystem, in the same way that having fewer types of tomatoes creates a weaker ecosystem. A system built on colonialism and built on white supremacy creates mediocrity within leadership, and that's something that's interesting. So if we can accept that that's true, then I guess the question becomes, well, why don't we leverage that difference? And I think I know the answer to that question, but I'd really love to know what you two think. Oh, wait, what did Manal say? Hang on. The ecological example. Yep, cool.
Lolly, did you want to jump into that first?
Oh, please, go ahead.
Let me start. And Lolly, I think you're going to be able to add a lot more context to it. So let me just sort of try and put a stake in the ground to start with. When I think about, there's so many layers to why do we not embrace diversity well? And first of all, I think we have to recognize it's a balancing act. It's not about seeking the most diversity necessarily. In some cases, maybe that's the right answer. But what we have to do is recognize in each context, how much diversity do we really need? And I keep using the word diversity when we said we're going to use difference, but how much difference do we need? What's necessary for the context that we've got? And then how do we actually structure that diversity? And I think a lot of people, number one, don't know how to even have those conversations. I think a lot of people aren't even aware of what kinds of diversity they're not bringing to the table. And then there's a fear factor of, if we start bringing differences to the table, whether it's different people that I don't know or I don't like or I don't understand, or if it's different ideas or different processes or ways of doing things, or different ways of, differences based on different belief systems or different identities, then people start feeling threatened at a personal level. So just to put the stake in the ground, I think there's everything from people not having the abilities to not being ready to not being willing. Yeah.
I'm so fascinated by this idea of fear.
Yeah.
Because at once you're speaking about fear, and then you said the fear of not liking something, and that just feels or sounds like just general animosity or animus or hate, perhaps.
In some cases, for sure.
Right. And so what does fear or hiding behind fear allow people to get away from or not encounter, right? I love curiosity because it allows us to explore. And so, I would, offer you to be curious about white supremacy and what it might mean, to push through what is a politically charged reality for some people, but a kind of scary reality for others.
Terrifying reality for a lot of people.
But in terms of, embracing difference, I think as Todd was speaking about, how joyous it is, right? To be in a place where you are, not only aligned with people because of a shared mission and vision, but when it comes to values, how joyful it is and how much my own life is enriched when I'm surrounded by difference, right? Whether that's race, gender, ability, sexuality, age, right? I'm the youngest person on my team. I work with these bold, brave, badass women in their 50s and 60s, and to be in these intergenerational workspaces has totally broke open and expanded my ability to think, and I would even say feel and play, right? These women have offered me so many valuable insights about what it means to live in this world. And that would have never been able to occur for me personally if I was in a workplace with all of the same people, right? And for me, like, it's that sameness that is so important, right? Like difference for me is like a really cool idea because it offers you new ways of like being and thinking and playing, and that has always, for me at least, been a gift.
Yeah. Bruno's added that true leadership embraces the diversity of energy, recognizing, here, I'll bring it up on the screen, recognizing that every individual brings a unique power that when harnessed can create a force that drives success. And I think that's a really interesting concept to think about too, because it's not just, while it is also enriching for the self, right? The curious leader wants to embrace the differences because there's a self-enrichment that goes along with it. But there's also a broader dynamic that's beyond just the self. And I think that that's the community aspect that you were talking about, Lolly. I think that there's something there. So what could a curious leader do? Like, if a curious leader wants to flex that difference muscle, right? Like, what are some of the things that might need to be learned or unlearned in order to do that? And I think that there's a distinction between those two things. And I'm saying that from my own personal experience, because I know I had to unlearn a lot of stuff.
I work in organizations. Oh, sorry, Katerina.
All I was going to say is it's a painful process, but when it's done, it's good. Go ahead, Lolly.
Yeah, and like, part of unlearning is it's like deeply uncomfortable. And sometimes, right, it's cool to just chill in your uncomfortableness and see what happens, right? Like, where do you feel like most uncomfortable? Like, touch that part of your body and like sit with it. I work at organizations where it's really important for the workplace and the workforce to like reflect the diversity of its clients, right? And so I work in the healthcare system and in Toronto's downtown east. It's when you're getting, like a particular kind of population coming through your doors to access services and resources, it's like incumbent on the organization to reflect that diversity that you're seeing come through the door, right? And I imagine for corporations, right? Like, what does it mean when your workforce reflects the diversity of your clients? And what might that workforce offer you in, like meeting some of like the organizational goals and needs? So I think in a business sense, it just makes sense to like think through difference and diversity. But to even get there, right? Like, I think is a deeply uncomfortable process. And sometimes you have to let go of fear and let go of that feeling of being uncomfortable and embrace, what happens.
Yeah. I'd like to share just a little bit of sort of what I experienced when I was doing some unlearning, if that's okay. And because I agree with what you're saying, and you're right, some of that unlearning is uncomfortable. So the example that I'll give is that, the version of Canadian history that I learned in grade school and in high school in the 70s and 80s was extraordinarily whitewashed and had very little to do with the actual history of this land that we call Canada.
What do you mean the First Nations didn't love everything that happened to them?
I know, right? Thanksgiving wasn't at all what they said it was. Yeah. So right. Well, and the thing is too, is like, it's not lost on me either that when I was in school, the residential school system was still in operation. So right.
It was while I was in school as well, Todd.
I know.
It ended in 1996, right? Like,
exactly. It's recent. So there's a lot of unlearning that had to go in, and the reason that I'm choosing that as an example is because you're right, Lolly. That was really uncomfortable for me, but it was life-threatening for someone else. So the choice between not sitting with my discomfort. Right? When the consequences of not sitting with my discomfort were dire, or would have been dire. Just it didn't seem like it's a burning platform. My choice is to change. My choice is not like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then once you see it, that sparks the curiosity, because like, well, what else have I? It's almost like, this is going to sound so weird, but it's almost like unraveling a conspiracy theory that you've been wrapped up in for your entire life. Okay, so now I'll pause.
Yeah. I think what's important to look at when we're talking about, so I grew up in Kamloops, British Columbia, which has made the news for some not so good reasons. We had one of the last residential schools to close in the residential school system. I was fully aware of it when I was a kid. And I had a First Nations teacher in grade 3, Mrs. Isabel Fox, who I thought was one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life. So this is something that I sort of grew up with, and I'm lucky, in quotation marks, that I didn't quite, and then because I'm an outsider as well, I'm white, blonde hair, blue eyed, but I always was an outsider because I was German in a town that was mostly British, with a lot of animosity from World War II, even though I was born a few years after that. So I had a very different perspective of how abuse worked. And what I found really interesting is that you use the words, for First Nations, and Black people are going to have the same experience. And anybody who sort of is not in the right place at the right time with the wrong skin color is going to have this experience where it's a life-threatening situation. But what I also observed is genocidal, right? There were people in my hometown that were truly genocidal. And there were some that just sort of denied that it was life-threatening for individuals. Just like here in Toronto, you hear people say, oh, the racism, it's bad, and yes, it's a problem. Yes, we need to do something about it. But I think a lot of people are in denial. White people are in denial. Middle class, upper middle class people are in denial about how bad it really can be for some people. So I would call that sort of like the dangerously ignorant. And then there's other people, like some of the people that were in the neighborhood that I grew up in, where they were so brainwashed to believe that things were the way they were for good reasons in terms of the discrimination against First Nations. So I think what we have to do is recognize there's many different reasons why we discriminate against people and how we enact that. And if we start digging down, and this might get to the fear question or the fear comment that you made, Lally, is there's some people, so working from that bottom up, meaning the people who are just uneducated, and I'm being polite, they choose not to educate themselves. That comes from naivete and a comfort and not really having to question things. So that comes from a laziness and a safety, a place of safety. When you get the people who sort of, think we need to have the hard line and make people behave and stuff like that, that starts coming from a little bit more hatred. And that comes from their personal life experiences of how much did they have to suppress themselves in order to fit in, even though they visually fit into certain cultures, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of people who bear real animosity because they feel like, well, I had to put up with bad things. And therefore, if other people have to put up with a few bad things, well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's just life, right? Mm. And then when we get to the genocidal people, and that's obviously an extreme term, but when we get to the people who are really what we would call evil, a lot of times that's because they feel, and I'm obviously generalizing and oversimplifying, but those people are often the ones that are really seriously broken people. They really believe that the only way I survive is by being on top. And obviously everybody's going to define that differently, but it's, they look at the world in the most extreme, nasty, zero-sum game. Either I win and I eat, or you win and you eat, and one of us is not going to be eating. And let me tell you, if I've got the ability to force you to lose and allow me to win and allow my family to win, I will do everything I can. Mm-hmm. And I think when we look globally at the different types of isms there are around the world, I think a lot of that is based on that real fear of survival and that existential fear, existential fear coming from genocidal tendencies, or feeling like not just you are going to be killed, but your family is going to be eradicated, your cultural history is going to be eradicated. That's genocide. And when people have some feeling of that, regardless of how real it is, that's when they start playing this zero-sum game and basically doing this domination, blah, 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 right? So I think what we have to do is sort of look at the different layers of where these isms come from.
That is, wow. There's so much there, Kat. And I hate to do this because I know that we have a stop in about 4 minutes. So,
yes, but I would just love to jump in if that's okay, Todd.
Yeah, I would like. So I'd like to do that. I was going to open it up, and please, Lolly, if you'd like to, give us the last word.
Well, maybe not the last word,
Well,
but
one of the
two
last
brief.
words.
Oh, one of the
Please.
last. One of three,
Sure.
I hope.
No, you got so much time. Do for it.
One
Go for
of like a comment, and just sort of pivoting back to the leveraging the power of different space. But my one comment is, I'm often really fascinated by what people don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, right, I feel like not knowing has become a way of knowing. Meaning, right, like there's sort of like an epistemology of being ignorant, like a lot of people, yes, thank you, Katerina, will like blind themselves intentionally, right? So they can like
fingers in their ears,
walk and navigate through the world, right? Not seeing all of the things that are happening around them, because then they can feign ignorance, and for me, like one of the most powerful CEOs that I've ever worked with, right, went through a process at her organization where there was like a very long time where like racialized employees were like leaving, and were participating in like exit interviews and saying very clearly this is like a toxic work environment. And she could have ignored it and ripped up those exit interviews, right? But decided like this is not the legacy that I want for myself and for this organization. And so she began like this lengthy process of just like deeply listening to people. And of course, in the beginning, there are lots of people who are like, oh my God, tell me your problems. I'll listen to you. I'll make changes. And like for a lot of like racialized workers in Ontario, right, you can't trust that, right? And so like, you'll tell the organization what you think they want to hear so you can continue to, like work in a place that you find value in and also like receive income from to support your families. But it was just like incredibly like, and it sounds so simple, right? Like she listened, but it was this like radical act where from the janitors to the frontline staff, to the security, to the leadership team, to the senior leadership team, where this like incredibly like, like this incredible person just like deeply listened because it was like, I don't want this to continue. And before she could embrace difference, before she could, look at like the practices of the organization, the institutional policies, right? She like went on this journey to just listen to people. And I imagine it is so hard to not feel defensive when someone is like saying, yo, you are cultivating a workplace that is like hella racist. Like I can't even imagine hearing that, and I'm a Black guy, right? Like, and so it's, I found it to be like the bravest thing that anybody could do is just like listen actively, deeply, unself-consciously, and perhaps when you listen, curiosity can, like fly and be curious and do its thing.
Lolly, I think that what you gave us was a really excellent example of curiosity at work in leadership, and we are at time. So I actually think that that's a really wonderful way to wrap this one up. Lolly, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Kat, as always. I love working with you, and I love working with you, Lolly. I know we've known each other for a while, so thank you so much. And I think that's it. Unless is there anything real fast that we want to say to wrap up?
I just want to echo what Lolly said, is be open, be curious, be willing to sit with the uncomfortable, be able to really challenge yourself. And it's, and Manal, you made the comment in there, why do you have to carry the fear all on your own? You know, that's totally unfair, and it's not your job to educate people like me. And at the same time, it kind of is, you know, and that's a real balance that I think we have to have two levels of conversations. We have to have the conversation of how do we open ourselves up for differences, not just isms, but also different ways of being, different ways of acting, everything from even how do we approach change differently. And then we also need to have that meta conversation, which is a little bit what we were touching on today, of how do we become better at listening to each other and working with each other and challenging and supporting each other as we go through that unlearning, you know, and all that discomfort. So I think it's two layers of conversations that we really need. Yeah. And Lolly, thank you. Those great, really great contribution. I really appreciate all the things that you said today.
Thank you both for having me. And
Thank
thanks
you so
to all
much.
the wonderful commenters.
Yes, exactly.
We really appreciate you too. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you so much, both of you.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.